What if one of the greatest secrets about Jesus wasn't found in the Bible, but hidden in the mountains of India? For nearly 2,000 years, Christians around the world have accepted the story of Jesus as told in the Gospels, his birth, his ministry, his crucifixion, and his resurrection. But there's a gaping hole in the narrative that most people either ignore or never question. From the age of 12 to 30, Jesus vanishes from the historical record. These are often referred to as the lost years. Nearly 2 decades of silence in the very center of his life. What happened during this time? Where did he go? And why does no one talk about it? In recent centuries, strange and compelling clues have emerged from an unexpected place, the ancient monasteries of northern India and Tibet. There, in hidden libraries and whispered oral traditions, are stories of a man called Isa, a foreign teacher from the West, who arrived seeking truth, mastered the spiritual sciences of the East, and taught compassion, non-violence, and the divine spark within. The parallels to Jesus are too striking to ignore. Even more shocking, 19th and 20th century explorers claim to have discovered ancient scrolls documenting his journey. Is it possible that Jesus traveled to India, studied among sages and mystics, and returned to the West with a message that fused both worlds? Could the hidden years of Jesus' life be the key to understanding his true teachings and why they were so radical? This is the story you were never told, and once you hear it, you may never see Jesus the same way again. The Gospels give us glimpses of Jesus as a child, his miraculous birth in Bethlehem, the visit from the Magi, the flight to Egypt, and then a brief scene at age 12 when he's found teaching in the temple, astonishing scholars with his wisdom. But after that moment, the curtain falls. From the age of 12 until he reappears around 30, ready to be baptized by John and begin his public ministry, Jesus vanishes from the story. 18 years. Lost. Unexplained. Forgotten. For such a central figure in human history, this silence is both haunting and suspicious. How could nearly 2 decades of his life, his formative years, be left completely undocumented, especially considering that in those years, he would have gone from boy to man, from student to teacher, from unknown carpenter to spiritual revolutionary. Isn't it strange that the Gospels, so rich in detail about his final 3 years, are completely silent about the middle 2 decades? Theologians and scholars have wrestled with this question for centuries. Some suggest that Jesus simply lived quietly in Nazareth, apprenticing under Joseph as a carpenter and waiting for his divine calling. Others argue that this silence is intentional, a gap meant to emphasize the miraculous nature of his sudden appearance at the Jordan River. But these explanations feel increasingly hollow in the face of global clues pointing elsewhere. In the East, particularly in India and Tibet, traditions speak of a mysterious teacher named Isa, who came from the West. Could these legends be connected to Jesus' missing years? If Jesus was indeed the kind of spiritual seeker willing to challenge religious authority and teach universal love, wouldn't it make sense that he sought wisdom beyond the borders of Judea? What if those lost years weren't lost at all, just hidden from Western view? In fact, several 19th century travelers, mystics, and researchers began to notice peculiar patterns. They found stories passed down through generations in Buddhist monasteries, records written in ancient Tibetan dialects, and even local shrines said to be visited by a holy man from Judea. All of them point to the same shocking possibility that Jesus, the same man who would later preach the Sermon on the Mount, once walked the Himalayas, studied ancient Vedic scriptures, and learned the path of the Bodhisattva. It may sound unbelievable. It may challenge everything you thought you knew. But we have to ask, is it more logical to believe that Jesus lived an uneventful, undocumented life for 18 years, or that he undertook a spiritual pilgrimage that transformed him and later the world? To understand what really may have happened, we have to leave the boundaries of traditional church doctrine and step into the untold chapters of global history. Because Jesus' story doesn't just belong to the West, it may stretch farther and deeper than anyone imagined. In 1894, a Russian aristocrat and adventurer named Nicholas Notovich made a stunning claim. While recovering from a broken leg at the Hemis Monastery in Ladakh, a remote region in the Indian Himalayas, he was shown ancient scrolls that detailed the life of a man named Isa, a holy teacher from the West. According to the monks, Isa had come to India during his youth, studied the Vedas, lived with Brahmins and Buddhists, and eventually returned to his homeland, where he was persecuted and killed by those in power. The parallels to the life of Jesus Christ were unmistakable. Notovich published his findings in a book titled The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, in which he presented translations of the manuscripts he claimed to have seen. These scrolls described how Isa crossed Sind and studied the laws of the great Buddhas, and how he preached against the caste system, promoted compassion for all beings, and challenged the corruption of religious elites, ideas that sound eerily similar to Christ's later teachings in Judea. The account quickly stirred controversy. Scholars across Europe called it a hoax. Critics accused Notovich of fabrication, arguing that no such scrolls existed and that no one had ever heard of them before. But then something unexpected happened. Other explorers and spiritual seekers began traveling to Hemis Monastery to investigate. Some of them, including Swami Abhedananda, a respected Indian mystic and disciple of Ramakrishna, claimed to have found confirmation of Notovich's claims. Abhedananda wrote that he too saw the same manuscripts and was convinced they were authentic. In the early 20th century, Nicholas Roerich, a Russian philosopher, artist, and explorer, also traveled through the Himalayas and recorded accounts of a great saint named Isa, known among the lamas. Roerich wrote that stories of Jesus were widespread in Tibet, and that local monks considered him a bodhisattva, a soul who had reached enlightenment, but chose to return to help others ascend. So why haven't these findings been accepted in the mainstream historical narrative? The answer lies not in the absence of evidence, but in the reluctance of institutions to revise their sacred timelines. The idea of Jesus traveling to India challenges deeply held beliefs about the uniqueness of Christianity and the boundaries of its origins. It implies that Eastern wisdom influenced Western revelation, a concept many religious authorities are unwilling to entertain. But the documentation is not limited to oral traditions or the claims of wandering mystics. The manuscript allegedly found at Hemis was said to be a translation of even older Pali scrolls, originally written in Lhasa, Tibet's capital. According to those texts, Isa came from the West, studied in India, and Nepal challenged both Hindu and Buddhist authority, and left after years of teaching and initiation. When compared with the biblical Jesus, the similarities are not vague. They are precise and startling. Even descriptions of Isa's personality, appearance, and message echo what we know of Jesus. He was said to have golden hair and eyes like the sky, to heal the sick, to perform acts of mercy, and to speak with great authority. The scrolls mention how Isa denounced idol worship, emphasized the eternal soul, and called for spiritual liberation through love and discipline. Still, modern historians largely ignore this material. Why? Because verifying the manuscripts is difficult. No official copies have been made publicly available. Monks at Hemis are notoriously protective of their archives, and the lines between history, mythology, and sacred tradition are often blurred in Eastern cultures. This ambiguity makes Western scholars uncomfortable. They want hard proof, photographs, carbon dating, a paper trail. But perhaps in this case, the trail is preserved not in ink, but in memory, guarded by those who still carry oral histories of a foreign prophet who walked their lands. If even part of this is true, it reframes everything. It suggests that Jesus did not emerge in a vacuum, but was part of a global spiritual current, one that stretched across deserts, mountains, and cultures. It makes him not just a Jewish rabbi, but a world teacher. And the evidence doesn't stop here. In the next section, we'll explore the teachings themselves and how many of Jesus' messages mirror those of the Buddha and the sages of India. If Jesus truly spent his lost years in India and Tibet, we would expect to find echoes of Eastern philosophy woven into his later teachings, and we do. Though separated by geography and culture, the teachings of Jesus Christ and those of Hinduism and Buddhism reveal surprising parallels that are difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Consider one of Jesus' most radical messages. The kingdom of God is within you. This idea that divinity is not external, but something to be awakened inside, is a core tenet of Eastern mysticism. Hinduism teaches that the Atman, the individual soul, is one with Brahman, the universal consciousness, and that liberation comes through realizing this unity. Buddhism speaks of Buddha nature, the innate potential for enlightenment within all beings. In both traditions, the path to truth is internal, not external. Jesus, too, guided people inward to the heart, the soul, the inner kingdom. His teachings on nonviolence and compassion align closely with the Eastern spiritual ethos. When Jesus says, "Love your enemies," "Bless those who curse you," he mirrors the ahimsa principle in Jainism and Hinduism, the deep commitment to non-harm in thought, word, and action. The Sermon on the Mount, with its emphasis on mercy, humility, and spiritual poverty, reads like a blend of the Bhagavad Gita's call for selfless action and the Dhammapada's celebration of inner peace. Even Jesus' parables, simple stories that reveal deep spiritual truths, resemble the koans used in Zen Buddhism or the metaphoric fables found in the Upanishads. His method of teaching through paradox, metaphor, and silence evokes the style of a guru, not just a prophet. Then there's his ascetic lifestyle. Like a sannyasin or wandering sadhu, Jesus had no permanent home. He traveled from village to village, often with nothing but the clothes on his back, teaching wherever people would listen. He healed the sick, not for recognition, but out of service. He challenged materialism, questioned temple authority, and called for spiritual rebirth, all themes found in Eastern yogic traditions. We also find ritual similarities. Jesus fasted for 40 days in the desert, a practice reminiscent of the extended tapasya austerities undertaken by Indian sages to attain spiritual insight. His emphasis on prayer and solitude echoes the meditative disciplines found across Eastern paths. His baptism in the Jordan may even reflect the purifying water rituals practiced in the Ganges and other sacred rivers of the East. Of course, similarities alone don't prove historical contact. Philosophies can evolve in parallel, but when these parallels are combined with the testimonies from Hemis Monastery, the legends of Isa, and the oral traditions in Kashmir and Ladakh, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. These aren't just vague spiritual ideas, they are systemic overlaps, and they beg a deeper question. Was Jesus a syncretic teacher, one who synthesized the best of many traditions into a message the world desperately needed? If Jesus did indeed study in the East, it wouldn't diminish his divinity, it would illuminate the universality of truth. His teachings then become part of a greater tapestry, one that unites rather than divides, that shows how wisdom speaks in many tongues, and how enlightenment is not a trademark of any one religion. In the next section, we'll dive even deeper into ancient Buddhist and Hindu records that speak directly of a man called Isa, whose story might just rewrite everything we thought we knew about Jesus. While Western Christianity has largely ignored the possibility of Jesus traveling, East Buddhist and Hindu traditions have preserved stories that may point directly to his presence. These accounts revolve around a figure known as Isa, a name remarkably similar to the Arabic and Eastern pronunciation of Jesus. Descriptions of this enigmatic teacher bear uncanny resemblances to the life message and personality of Christ. In Buddhist monasteries of Ladakh and Tibet, oral legends describe a man from the West who came during ancient times to study sacred teachings. This man, referred to as Isa, is described as humble, enlightened, and divinely inspired. He was said to have learned from both Brahmins and Buddhists, challenging religious dogma, advocating for the rights of the poor and oppressed, and condemning idol worship and hypocrisy in the temples, just as Jesus would later do in Jerusalem. The Life of Saint Isa scrolls, which Notovich claimed to have seen at Hemis Monastery, tell of how this teacher arrived in India during his youth and immersed himself in the Vedas. He studied Sanskrit, delved into ancient texts, and lived among the untouchables, teaching them that divine truth was not reserved for the priestly caste. His popularity grew, but so did the anger of the elite. According to these records, Isa was eventually forced to flee, narrowly avoiding persecution, before returning westward to continue his mission. Outside of Buddhist circles, Hindu legends also speak of a foreign teacher who spent time in the region of Kashmir, specifically in Srinagar. In the heart of that city stands the Rosabal Shrine, a mysterious tomb that some believe to be the final resting place of none other than Jesus of Nazareth. Locals have long venerated the tomb as that of a great prophet known as Uz Asaf, a man said to have come from the West and brought teachings of peace, unity, and inner light. Some scholars have dismissed these legends as apocryphal or symbolic, but others argued that the convergence of names, details, and themes is too specific to be mere coincidence. The name Uz Asaf translates roughly as leader of the healed, a striking description for a man known for healing the sick and resurrecting the dead. The shrine even contains carvings of feet, bearing crucifixion-like wounds, another clue that cannot easily be ignored. In the Bhavishya Purana, an ancient Hindu text written centuries ago, there is a story of a foreign holy man named Isa Masih who met with an Indian king. This sage was described as a truth seeker, known for miracles, and a messenger of the divine. Isa Masih explained that he came from a foreign land where he had suffered persecution, but that his mission was to bring light to all mankind. These scattered traditions, Tibetan scrolls, Kashmiri shrines, ancient Hindu scriptures, may seem disconnected at first glance, but when viewed together, they create a mosaic of remembrance. A story whispered across cultures and guarded through generations, not out of rebellion against orthodoxy, but out of reverence for a spiritual presence too large to be confined by geography. Could these be echoes of the lost years of Jesus? Have the Eastern keepers of memory preserved something that the West chose to forget? And if so, what else lies hidden in the folds of time waiting to be remembered? Next, we'll examine the counter-arguments, the skeptical scholars, the critics, and those who say this theory is nothing more than myth. Because to get to truth, we must pass through doubt. For every mysterious manuscript and tantalizing legend that links Jesus to India, there is a wall of scholarly resistance waiting to dismantle it. Mainstream historians, theologians, and biblical academics have consistently rejected the idea that Jesus ever left Judea, let alone traveled thousands of miles to study in the East. According to them, the theory is based on flimsy evidence, questionable translations, and a heavy dose of wishful thinking. Their first line of defense is the lack of archaeological or textual verification. While Notovich claimed to have seen ancient scrolls in Hemis Monastery, no verified copies of those documents have ever surfaced in the public domain. In fact, when other scholars visited Hemis shortly after his book was published, the monks allegedly denied ever having shown such texts to anyone. Critics argue that this inconsistency casts serious doubt on the credibility of Notovich's entire story. Was he lied to misled, or did he fabricate the entire tale? Some scholars have even accused Notovich of attempting to sensationalize Eastern mysticism to appeal to the spiritual hunger of the 19th century West, a time when Orientalism and exotic religions were romanticized by European intellectuals. They argue that he never broke his leg, never stayed at Hemis, and likely never saw any scrolls at all. The second major critique comes from textual analysis. Experts in ancient languages have questioned the accuracy of the translations presented in the unknown life of Jesus Christ. Certain phrases appear to echo New Testament wording, too closely suggesting they may have been adapted or invented to fit a desired narrative. Others point out that the historical timelines within the scrolls are vague, imprecise, or outright anachronistic, making it difficult to place Isa definitively within Jesus' lifetime. Then there's the issue of confirmation bias. Critics say that researchers like Swami Abhedananda or Nicholas Roerich were already spiritually predisposed to believe in the unity of all religious traditions, and thus more likely to see parallels where none existed. They argue that these figures weren't historians, but mystics more interested in metaphysical synthesis than historical precision. Finally, skeptics highlight a simple but often overlooked point. Jesus was Jewish, and his teachings were deeply rooted in Jewish law, and prophetic tradition. They argue that the similarities with Eastern thought don't require physical travel to India. Spiritual ideas like compassion meditation or inner divinity are not unique to the East. They may have emerged independently or as part of the universal human search for meaning, and yet these arguments, while logical on the surface, don't entirely close the case. The absence of hard evidence is not proof of absence. Eastern cultures have long relied on oral transmission, not centralized scripture. Many sacred records have been destroyed, hidden or encoded for initiates only. Monasteries like Hemus are not research libraries. They are gatekeepers of spiritual heritage, and secrecy is often part of their duty. Moreover, the visceral hostility with which the Jesus in India theory has been dismissed suggests not just academic caution, but ideological discomfort. If Jesus did study in the East, it would dismantle the exclusivity of many church doctrines. It would imply that truth is not monopolized by any one tradition, but shared across continents and cultures, a revolutionary idea that institutions may find threatening. So is skepticism warranted? Absolutely. But so is curiosity. Because when so many cultures point to a shared memory, and when those memories echo the life of one of the most influential figures in history, perhaps we owe it to ourselves to ask why they persist. In the next part, we'll shift from facts to meaning, what it would actually mean for humanity and spirituality if Jesus did in fact journey east. Let's suspend disbelief for a moment. Let's imagine that the legends are true, that Jesus, in the years unaccounted for by the Bible, journeyed across deserts and mountains, seeking wisdom in ancient temples, debating sages in hidden monasteries, and sitting at the feet of Brahmins and Buddhists. What changes? Everything. If Jesus studied in India, it would suggest that his spiritual development was not isolated, but interwoven with the world's oldest mystical traditions. It would mean that the Sermon on the Mount wasn't a divine download dropped from the sky, but the refined result of years of disciplined study, internal transformation, and integration of global truths. In this view, Jesus doesn't lose his divine nature. He embodies it more fully by showing how human effort, pilgrimage, and devotion can awaken the divine spark within us. Imagine a Christ not constrained by borders, not belonging to a single religion, ethnicity, or culture, but shaped by the wisdom of multiple paths. A spiritual bridge between East and West. His core message of mercy, the kingdom within, becomes less of a theological dogma and more of a universal initiation into higher consciousness. This possibility also reframes the idea of salvation. In traditional Christian doctrine, salvation is granted through belief in the uniqueness of Jesus as the Son of God. But if Jesus learned from multiple traditions, taught universal principles, and walked the same path of awakening available to us all, then salvation becomes not a transaction, but a transformation, a process of inner realization available to anyone anywhere. Moreover, this theory injects new life into interfaith dialogue. Suddenly, Jesus and the Buddha aren't opposites, but companions on the path. Suddenly, the Vedic concept of the Atman and Jesus' phrase, "I and the Father," are one seem not contradictory, but complementary. The mystical thread running through all great traditions becomes more visible, stronger, and harder to dismiss. But there's something deeper. If Jesus willingly left the safety of home to travel into the unknown in search of truth, the journey itself becomes a spiritual teaching. It shows us that truth is not something passively inherited. It's something you must seek, question, wrestle with, and embody. The lost years become sacred, not because of where he went, but because he went at all. His willingness to learn, to listen, to evolve, reveals that spiritual growth is a journey, not a static identity. And if Jesus brought Eastern insights back to the West, his crucifixion takes on another layer of meaning. It becomes not only a political and religious execution, but the suppression of a message that threatened power structures. A message that fused the wisdom of many traditions into one liberating call to inner freedom. Of course, we may never find physical proof, but maybe that's the point. Maybe what matters is not whether Jesus literally went to India, but whether we are willing to reimagine him as a global teacher, not confined to doctrine, but alive in the hearts of all seekers. In our final section, we'll tie it all together, not as a conclusion, but as an invitation to remember, to question, and to see Jesus not as someone who belongs to the past, but someone who still walks beside us, just beyond the walls of tradition. What if the most important parts of Jesus' life were the ones never written down? Not because they were unimportant, but because they were too powerful. The journey we've taken in this video hasn't offered hard conclusions, but something far more valuable. An invitation to question, to seek, and to awaken to the possibility that Jesus' story is bigger than we've ever allowed ourselves to imagine. If the hidden years of Christ truly led him to the East, it means that the message we inherited was only half the truth, a fragment of a much larger revelation. It means that the teacher we thought we knew walked in many lands, sat among many seekers, and drank from many wells of wisdom. And it means that his light, the Christ light, is not a Western flame, but a universal fire, burning at the heart of all true paths. Whether or not he traveled to India may ultimately be less important than what the question itself reveals, that we are hungry for a deeper Jesus, a Jesus unbound by dogma and history, a Jesus who belongs not to one church or culture, but to the human soul itself. The traditions of Ladakh, Kashmir, and Tibet didn't try to convert Jesus into their own. They simply remembered. In their scrolls and stories, they kept alive the idea that truth is always traveling, always being born, always wearing new names in new lands. They didn't need proof, they had memory. And perhaps deep down, so do we. Maybe the reason these stories have been hidden is because they remind us of our own forgotten path, the path inward, the path home. So as you finish this video, don't just ask whether Jesus went to India. Ask yourself, where have you not yet dared to look for truth? What parts of your own soul have you left undocumented? The real journey of Christ isn't just a historical mystery. It's a living call to rediscover what you already carry inside. And maybe, just maybe, that journey begins where the written story ends.